Hi, it's Miss Kelley again. Hopefully you've turned your packet to the page that says Notes, Cell Structure, and Function. So what you want to know at the end of today is what the cell structures are and then what they do in the cell. Alright, so like I said, it's structure and function. So in order to know what we're talking about organelles. So what are they? The word organelle means little organ. So like if you're in Spanish, like a chica is a girl, a chiquita is a little girl. I think they have something similar in the French language, so that little L part on the end means little. So this is a eukaryotic cell or a prokaryotic cell. So hopefully you said it was a eukaryotic cell. And why? You do. They do have a nucleus right there. So because the cell has a nucleus, it is a eukaryotic cell. And all of the structures you see inside it are organelles. They're only inside eukaryotes. So that's one of the definitions, is that not only do eukaryotes have a nucleus, but they also have other membrane-bound organelles. In this picture, all of the blue stuff that you see that surrounds all the structures, that's called cytoplasm. So if you thought of the cell as a bowl full of fruit jello, if you've ever had that fruit jello with the fruit pieces floating within the jello, everything around here would be jello, and then these structures would be the different pieces of fruit. Alright, so let's go ahead and just talk about the different structures. The cell membrane, that is the boundary of the cell, so it's the outside of the cell. And it controls what enters and leaves the cell. Alright, and so what you see in this diagram is the cell membrane. And we just got done talking about lipids, so the cell membrane is actually made of lipids. There's two different layers there. So each one of those circles with tails is a lipid molecule. So we say it's a phospholipid bilayer because there's not just one layer on the top, but there's another layer across the bottom. The inside is hydrophobic or water-fearing, and then the outside, those balls, are hydrophilic or water-loving. In other words, the balls are polar and the tails are nonpolar. The nucleus is the control center of the cell. You might have heard it referred to as the brain of the cell. What I want you to know is it stores DNA. It's surrounded by a double membrane. And when we look at cells under the microscope, it's probably going to be the easiest structure that you'll be able to see. So a lot of the structures are smaller, so we won't be able to see them, but the nucleus you can always see, and it stains really easily. Most cells are going to have one nucleus. There are some cells that will have two nuclei, and then there are some cells, like when red blood cells are mature, they don't have any nucleus at all. But most cells do have a nucleus for their entire life. Alright, the cytoskeleton, if you think about what that word looks like, it's a skeleton, and cyto means cell. So cytoskeleton is the cell skeleton. What it does is basically it's made of different tubes and filaments. So these kind of look like tubes and pipe cleaners, and they hold the structure of the cell in place. I saw somebody talk about an analogy where if it was the Golden Gate Bridge inverted, so it was inside the cell and holding the cell up, that's kind of what it would look like. It basically provides shape and structure for the cell. Your skeleton provides you with shape and structure, so same thing. Helps move organelles around the cell. So one thing that's different from our skeleton is that we don't really have things inside our body that hitch a ride on one bone and then go to the other, but the organelles can actually attach to the cytoskeleton and move around kind of like a zip line. Alright, so the next organelle is the endoplasmic reticulum. We abbreviate this with the ER. So when I say ER, endoplasmic reticulum, it's the same thing. And it looks like a little maze, doesn't it? So it's connected to the nucleus and the nuclear membrane. And so when the DNA has a set of instructions to build a protein, it sends them to the ER. Those instructions then go to a ribosome, and the ribosome reads the instructions and makes the protein. So the rough ER, if you look at this picture here, it has little dots on it. Those little dots are ribosomes, and those are our places where the ribosomes are actually making the protein. Okay, so the place in the cell that's actually making the product. There's also smooth ER. The smooth ER doesn't have ribosomes on it. It's responsible for making lipids, so it makes the cell membrane and the other membranes of the organelles. It detoxifies substances. Alright, so ribosomes we just talked about, so I want you to think to yourself, what did a ribosome do? It makes proteins. So the fancy way to say that is the site of protein synthesis, but it makes proteins. These are usually found attached to the rough ER, but they can also be free-floating in the cytoplasm. So again, picturing fruit and jello, like the fruit floating around. Ribosomes are actually made inside the nucleus, inside its nucleolus. So the nucleus has a small part inside it called the nucleolus, and that's what produces ribosomes. Ribosomes are made mostly of protein, and then they're also made of RNA. And we'll talk more about that in January. But again, a ribosome makes proteins, but it's made of proteins and RNA. So I know that's kind of weird, kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg, but proteins and RNA. So if you remember, a polypeptide is almost a protein. So ribosomes make proteins. Alright, we're almost finished. The Golgi apparatus, or you can say Golgi bodies or just say Golgi. It looks like a stack of plates or pancakes. And this is where our proteins are packaged up. So once we make the protein at the ribosome, it gets sent to the Golgi, and that's where if we need to make any changes to it, we can, and then we package it up either to be used in the cell or to exit the cell and be sent somewhere else. It says that molecules transported to and from the Golgi by means of vesicles. So vesicles are like little spaceships that carry the proteins around. So either, again, they can stay inside the cell, or those proteins can leave the cell. Alright, lysosomes. If you remember what hydrolysis does, lysis means to slice. So lysosomes are enzymes that break down or slice up old materials. So we say that they're the garbage disposal of the cell or the custodians of the cell. And basically they just have enzymes and they break down waste. Alright, the mitochondria, we say the mighty mitochondria because it's mighty because it produces energy. It's the powerhouse of the cell. It looks like a jelly bean or kidney bean, and it makes energy. So when cells make energy, that's called cellular respiration. And some of you, when we took the test yesterday, you saw ATP and started to panic. We haven't talked about it yet, but we are going to start to talk about it. And so ATP is the cell's energy. So this is where it's made. It also has a membrane, and it has its own strand of DNA. So like I talked about before, it's hypothesized that mitochondria was its own prokaryote at one time, and when it was eaten by another prokaryote, and for some reason or another it wasn't digested, and that became a symbiotic relationship. So now the mitochondria exists in all cells, all eukaryotic cells. Chloroplasts are responsible for photosynthesis. So notice they're green. They contain the pigment called chlorophyll. Chloro means green. Plast is a place. Chloro means green. Fill is a pigment. And this is where we make glucose. So only cells that are autotrophs are going to have chloroplasts. They could be plants, and they could be algae. They also have a membrane. So hopefully you're noticing that all of these organelles have a double membrane, or at least one membrane. The cell wall is found in plant cells and bacterial cells. And when plant walls, if you think about plants standing tall, one thing that helps them do that is their cell wall. It's the thing on the furthest outside of the plant cell, so it goes cell wall, cell membrane, cytoplasm with all the organelles. So the outermost part of a plant cell is the cell wall. And it's made of cellulose. And remember, we talked about cellulose. Cellulose makes you what? Hopefully you said poop. But cellulose is fiber, and it does keep you regular, so to speak. And vacuoles. Vacuoles are storage units. In the plant cell, the vacuole is large, and it stores water. So you can kind of see that if this is an entire plant cell, the majority of the cell is taken up by its vacuole, which is storing water. Water is important for photosynthesis. And then you can see the cell wall and some chloroplasts on the outside. Here is its nucleus here. But animal cells have small vacuoles that store water and food. Alright, and centrioles. Centrioles are found in animal cells, and they help the cell divide. They are made of the same components that the cytoskeleton is made of. So centrioles are going to help pull animal cells apart, but for some reason we don't see them in other cells. Alright, let's do a quick review before you finish the rest of this packet on your own. So, which organelle is the control center of the cell? Tell your neighbor. Nucleus. Alright. What structure regulates what enters and leaves the cell? Cell membrane. Alright, tell your neighbor which structures are not found in animal cells. Hopefully you said cell wall, central vacuole, and chloroplasts. Which organelle helps plant cells make food? And the last question, what does the ER stand for? Endoplasmic reticulum. Alright, so what you'll see in this packet is some basically reinforcement of what we just went over. I know it's hard to learn things when your teacher isn't here. So what I want you to do is fill out the diagrams and fill out the table. And when you fill out the table, please make sure that you abbreviate the definitions so they're in a form that's easy for you to remember, okay? Finish that up, and I hope you have a great weekend, no homework, and we will see you on Monday.